Hello and welcome to the Sense Making in a Changing World. I'm Morag. In this episode, I am so delighted to be speaking with Erik Ohlsen, a well-known, successful and much-loved Sonoma-based ecological designer, permaculture practitioner, educator, author and regenerative entrepreneur who runs multiple companies deeply grounded in a love of nature, of service to the community and based on the permaculture ethics and principles. Erik's just kind of one of those wonderful people who get stuff done. In this conversation, I ask Erik about how he's grown his wildly successful Permaculture Artisans company that is regenerating landscapes from urban to rural, and even as we spoke, in the process of informing the design of a permaculture agrihood. It's a wonderfully inspiring, uplifting, and wide-ranging conversation, spanning from his early volunteering projects, giving away gardens while cultivating huge social capital and skill development, to his current work and his legacy book, as he calls it, that's just about to be released by Synergetic Press, the massive 550-page guide, The Regenerative Landscaper, Design and Build Landscapes that Repair the Environment. This is going to become the go-to manual and curriculum for permaculture learners who want to put into practice all their learning in permaculture courses. It gets right into the nitty-gritty and shows how to make it work. Towards the end of the conversation, I ask Erik about his process of writing, and I now feel entirely liberated in how I can set about writing too. So thanks so much, Erik, and check that out if you're interested in writing as well. So this Sense Making in a Changing World podcast is the initiative of our Permaculture Education Institute. Here we teach permaculture design, teaching and business skills online to people on 6 continents, who in turn localize and enrich it and find appropriate ways to apply the planet care ethics of earth care, people care and fair share wherever they are. We'll definitely be recommending Erik's books to all of our students. I'm recording this episode from my hand-built solar-powered studio here on beautiful Gubby Gubby land, surrounded by my permaculture designed gardens in a permaculture eco-village. Before we jump in, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to Sense Making a Changing World on your favourite podcast app, and do remember to leave us a 5-star review and a lovely comment, because it absolutely does help the little bots to find this podcast. It was an absolute delight speaking with Erik, and I hope you enjoy listening in. Remember, check out the show notes below for links. And if you're listening before September 2023, keep an eye out for another session with Erik, and you're all invited to this one too. All right, let's go. Hi, Erik. Welcome to the show. It's really great to have you here on Sense Making the Changing World.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Well, across the oceans, I've been watching your work for a really long time and been superbly inspired by not just what you do, but where it comes from for you, like the heart of what you do, like your purpose in this. And maybe before we talk about your book and the work that you do, can we start just there? Like, where is that kind of fire in the belly for you about the reason that you do permaculture, and perhaps how you even discovered permaculture?
I got into permaculture when I was 19. So for me, this has been my entire adult life. I'm 44 now. And this is all I've done in my career. And what started for me was, first off, to know I was never very much an academic person. I didn't go to college, barely graduated high school, and didn't find a lot of nourishment there. But I got really turned on by honestly learning about some of the terrible things that happen in the world as a teen, as I think a lot of teens are experiencing right now. It's hard to look away from climate change. It's hard to look away from genetic engineering, genetic seeds, industrial agriculture, and all these things. And as a teen, you're about to inherit this world. You're about to come into and be a steward of this world. And these are, here's the keys to the house. Good luck. And what first turned me on was learning about Monsanto's Terminator seed technology. So that was back around 1999. And the concept of thinking about a technology that could sterilize the biosphere, sterilize the plant world, something inside me clicked, and I just became terrified and turned on at the same time. because coming from a fairly challenging home environment, I've been through a lot of challenging things in life, and getting through was always about, bootstrapping it, get to work. We could do this. We can change things. And when I first discovered permaculture, I found a sense of hope, a sense of belief in what's possible, that really sang the song of the natural world. I grew up a lot hiking and camping with my parents and being outdoors, most of the time. So the natural world was really infused in my life at all times. And when you look out into the forest, it's hard not to see abundance, right? It's hard not to see beauty and goodness and possibility. So permaculture became that for me, while holding this grief of the world that I was inheriting at a young age. And so I came through the ranks of hardcore activism, going to mobilizations, locking down in streets, getting arrested, protesting, organizing on all different levels, nonprofits, collectives, activist groups, and everything. And permaculture was a thread through all of that. And when we contrast the world that we know is possible, that we are creating, you and me and so many of your listeners here, and what we look out through the media, and we look out and we see through the industrial ag lens, and the technology complex, the military complex, all these things. When you hold up what we're creating out in the garden, it's like, it's not all bad. And we don't have to wallow in only how terrible things are, because we can create beauty, we can create abundance. And that's my drive. You asked what keeps me going, what my drive is getting out and listening to frogs and birds and watching the fox. We have a fox family living here that we see every day and we engage with every day. So being in a relationship with fox, these fuel me. These relationships fuel everything I do, because I know what's possible. I know abundance is possible.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you for articulating all of that, from the terror to the active hope, and to that being in relationship with the natural world, that we're not apart from it, that that daily relationship with other species. As you were speaking, I resonated a lot with my journey, that, the activist journey, getting and then trying to find a way to sort of, well, if not that, then what? What is the world that we're creating? And I heard another video of you talking about your one of those early projects when you were 19, getting started, called the Great Garden Giveaway. I wonder if you could kind of do a bit of a retrospective and tell us more about that, because there's something about the way that you were saying about, instead of going to college, I did this, and this was my learning ground. And through that, basically, you crafted what's become your career through starting in this way. And I think it's a beautiful inspiration to young people who are looking for an alternative way forward, like a way that we can step into this active hope and make a contribution. So I'd love you to just unravel that story a bit for us.
Yes, the Great Garden Giveaway. Thank you for representing that into the space here. I think in Australia you have the Permablitz.
Yes, we do.
Yes?
Yeah.
So this is almost the same thing, but before I first heard the word Permablitz, we kind of, maybe earlier pioneers in this, of course, all building on much more ancient ways of being. And so in 1999, we started an organization, Planting Earth Activation, PEA, like the pea plant. And our mission was to create a seed bank, a seed safety network in our community. And we did that by offering free gardens to anybody that wanted them. We were very idealistic and very powerful and very effective. And so there was, maybe a core, 8 to 10 of us, but we grew into, we worked with other collectives, and we grew into about 30, 40 strong, at our peak. And so what we would do is we'd go into a neighborhood and we'd walk down the street and we'd say, oh, there's a lawn. Oh, there's a lawn. Oh, there's a lawn. There's a lawn. Okay, our new target. So literally, we would go knock on the door. Hello, we're such and such, planting earth activation. Can we give you a garden for free? Turn your lawn into a garden. And hard for people to say no to that. And so the way that we organized this was usually a neighborhood weekend volunteer project. So we usually wanted to have around 6 gardens we were going to do at one time, but we've done up to 10. And we would organize a whole weekend volunteer effort. We got a lot of the compost and mulch and plants and things donated. And so we would take over a neighborhood. Sometimes we would even get all the signatures to literally shut the street down. The city would give us the cones. And, okay, the street's shut down for the weekend. And we would give gardens, front yard gardens, usually away through a weekend. And the exchange was that we would come back and save 25% of the garden we would let to go to seed. And we would save and process that seed as a community resource.
Wonderful. And, like as a direct response to that, Terminator gene, this whole cycle of and what that inspiration then created, like the ripple effects of what you were doing there, the closing the streets, building community, bringing food into the urban landscape. I mean, the way that ripples out, and then each of those 30 people and all the hundreds of people who are involved shifted something in them. So I think the power of these volunteer actions, the community activating programs are so awesome, and then rippled out into your enterprise and what's eventually also become your books that you're writing as well, I suppose. So just before we move into that though, this role of being a volunteer in permaculture, as a beginning point, as a training ground, maybe if you is there ways that you've seen through as you've continued on that you've been able to help other people to step into these volunteer roles or internships, or is there a way that you see in your world that can continue?
So I've spent years, 40 hours a week volunteering for many years. I built my whole career off of that. And of course, I had help from my parents and I had side jobs, and we fundraised a lot because when you think about being a permanent volunteer, I mean, that's a whole thing. I actually even started an organization once called Adopt an Activist, specifically to get to fundraise money for people who were volunteering full time. That's another story, but for me, it was my college period training ground. That's what it was. It was skill. It was about learning skills. It was about not just the skills of transforming a lawn into a garden and saving seed and planting fruit trees and building soil and catching water and all these things that we do, but also the skills of working in community, of building a vision, and then doing the work to see it come to fruition, of working with city politics, city government, and how do we engage these civil processes that are there for us to engage in. These was all part of the learning ground. And one of the benefits of volunteering beyond the skill building that you get, and I think next to skill building, the second greatest harvest of volunteering is social capital.
Yeah.
And my entire business, my entire career is built on social capital. And I still volunteer, even though I have a successful business and all this. I will, if somebody's in need, an organization needs support, they don't have funds and stuff, depending on who they are and what the situation is. I will go I'll spend a month with people who need it to do the work, because we can't lose track of the gift economy. We can't lose track of a non-monetary exchange with our people, with our land, with our community. And I think and that social capital that it generates, the relationships that it builds, what I like to say is a lot of the things that I do now don't really have a harvest for maybe another year or maybe 2 years or maybe 5 years. And that's kind of how social capital works. you don't get an immediate return because you're not really doing it for a return. You're doing it to be of service.
Yeah.
But inevitably you've put energy into a social bank account, and in some way it will come back, at times when you aren't expecting it, and times when you need it, and you can lean on that.
Yeah. And it's a kind of a trust, isn't it? A trust in the process of being part of something larger than yourself, and being in that mind, in that way of being, oh, I am part of this broader community, and if I give and someone else gives, and it kind of works out somehow. But it also means too that we do need to step in at some point and think, okay, well, there's things we need to make some money to actually do as well, which is where your companies come in. And I wonder if you could talk us through a bit of the way that you transitioned from your volunteerism approach to actually starting to make a good living from permaculture. And I also want to sort of talk a little bit too about sort of shattering that notion that we can't make a living out of permaculture. Like, I think it's essential that we do, and let's kind of explore that a bit too. So what was that transition point between being the active volunteer out in the streets, doing all that, into starting a business in permaculture?
One thing we have to kind of presence before we dive deep into that is what's happening on a mental, emotional level for folks when they're going into this activist mode, and all these wonderful things we said about volunteerism. But part of the motivation behind that is, anger about the world, this destroyed planet that I'm being inherited, grief that the generations before me didn't do more, and a feeling of, I need to be worthy somehow. And I think these are really important. We have to start here to understand this transition, because this self-identity of how we do the work and who we are and why we're doing it is fundamental, is make or break for the whole process. And I'll tell you what happened to me is I broke. I completely broke. I gave everything I could. My entire identity was wrapped up in being an activist, in being this person who volunteers, this person who goes out there. And then I got sick. I got a chronic illness, and I literally couldn't go to meetings. I couldn't go do the work that I had been doing before. I couldn't even teach a permaculture course. I was teaching permaculture courses since I was 22, and I had to stop doing that at that time. And it was, grief really set in, because these were the ways I was finding financial reciprocity, was being an activist, adopting an activist, getting fundraised money to care for me, working on projects that had funding behind them. And so then I was able to, make my ends meet that way, or teaching permaculture and getting paid a paycheck from that. And so when I got sick, I totally burnt out. I couldn't do these things. And I really had a identity crisis, honestly. And that identity crisis was rooted in the fact that if I couldn't go out, I hated money at this time in my life, in my early 20s. I literally hated money. And the idea that I couldn't make ends meet through my volunteerism, right? So it's weird to say it that way, but that's basically what it was. I couldn't tap into the fundraising and all of that. I had only one thing to fall back on, and that was my skills in permaculture. And I had to something in me had to change in order to say, I'm going to charge for my time. And I got invited onto my very first project. It was a commercial lavender farm with rainwater harvesting terraces and, microclimate moderation. And it had a stone fruit orchard element and all of this. And luckily that came around right as this was happening. I said, yes, I'll take this project on. And that was my very first project for my business, which is still alive today, Permaculture Artisans. We're a design contracting company. We've been around since 2005. And that very first year, when I got on that first project, and you just start with one, I had a wonderful client who was kind of mentored me. She was a businesswoman, very ecologically minded, saw that she helped me kind of get in. And the most amazing thing happened on that first project. I'll never forget it. I also hired a bunch of friends to come help me. And within that first year, we planted more fruit trees, built more water harvesting systems than in 2 years of nonprofit organizing.
Ah.
And all of us, we're able to pay our rent doing that. We were able to pay, put gas in our cars. We want to stay away from those as much as possible. I live in a rural area and we have to use vehicles to get around. And so it kind of blew my mind, like, whoa, wait a second. There's something here that I hadn't seen before, that now we're doing the work that builds soil. We're doing the work that harvests, captures, and stores water. We're growing food. We're growing medicine. And all these people, these guys and gals who are working with me, they get to do this for their job. And I get to do this for my job. And that a light bulb went off. And all of a sudden I understood something that it had taken me, I don't know how long that was, 6 years in the movement to understand. And that is that we can't be stuck doing this work as a hobby. Mm-hmm. This can't be just a hobby thing that people do on the weekends. I mean, that's lovely if that's what you do and you have a job you love and you do that. Great. I mean, no judgment, more power to you. But when you look at the scale of the problems, and we want to respond, we have the solutions, right? We have the solutions. That solutions are really not the issue at all. No. We have so many solutions, it's almost overwhelming. But how do we implement them? Well, we live in a society that is money-based. Let's be real. If you're putting on your permaculture lens and you're reading the existing landscape, that's the system that we're in. And yes, we can change the monetary system and we can do all these things, but if we base all of our work outside of the system of money right now, we're essentially not applying this permaculture principle of least change, because we can't use the existing resources that are moving quickly through all of our families and systems and communities towards that end. So the other piece is the social bit about permaculture, and yes, volunteering is lovely and wonderful and we should all put our time in it, but not everybody has a privilege to do that. Plenty of families are poor, living in poverty, don't have adequate housing, don't have clean water, don't have healthy food, and they have to work 6-7 days a week. That's just the reality. And I work with a lot of these families. I know a lot of these folks, and they're going to just go wherever the job is. People who are that desperate are going to go where the job is. Yeah. And if the only jobs that are available are spraying Roundup at the edges of a lawn and putting chemical fertilizer down and putting irrigation, that they're going to do that, because when it comes to baseline survival for a lot of people in the world right now, it is about money and access to that. So
creating work in this, creating livelihoods, not just for yourself, but for so many other people, is a prime directive. I think this is an enormous piece that we need to get as a movement. That, like exactly like you said, we have the solutions. You can look at all of the things that are going on, and you could kind of say, okay, well, the solution is permanent. There are so many different dimensions of this that come together through this way of thinking. It's not like a set of recipes, but it's a way of seeing the world. And if we apply that thinking to every single thing that we look at, there's possibilities everywhere. And I think we really need to be able to articulate that clearly and step up and speak up and be a little bit more. The word that keeps coming to me at the moment is audacious. We need to give ourselves a bit more, I suppose, permission and agency to step up and speak up and to put permaculture in all those different realms. And so how did you transition into that? So you did your first one, and how did you get from being your first garden, first landscape, to being this hugely successful company that you've created?
Well, So now I have to learn business skills, right? So that first year was, oh, now I have to learn how to, I hate asking for money. I hate charging, but I have to learn these skills, and I have to learn some project management skills. Different than when you're volunteering, you don't think as much about the logistics and costs of, say, getting a delivery of compost and the timing, and because that's gets donated, and it's like this resource that just arrives, and but when you're doing this work professionally and you're managing the flow of material in and out of a project, the timing, the staging, the placement, the costs, and the sequencing of the project itself, and how all of these factors play into that took a while to learn. That took probably about 5 years. And within that 5 years, I was just fortunate enough to just kind of barely make it to the end of one project, have no idea what's on the horizon. This is all about to just collapse under me. And then another project comes in, right? And usually I would volunteer a lot to initiate a project, because again, this is what I know. I know how to build social capital through volunteerism. So I'll work with a client. I'll go and I'll start doing free design and free consultation, and I'll take them out to lunch, whatever's needed. Build relationship, build trust. And then little by little, we have a project here, and how much is it going to cost? And we engage, we negotiate, and we do that. And so I was fortunate enough to just have referrals come in at the right moment. And I remember even once I was sitting in the parking lot of a landscape materials vendor, and I was all out of work. This was even my last day on the job. And I had, 4 people working for me at the time. And this is what they were feeding their families with, doing this work, working for me, doing this work. And if I couldn't get them work by Monday, why would they stick around with me? And that I've trained them in permaculture and the whole thing. And I was sitting there and I was pulling my hair out, and just kind of almost like prayers to the universe. I don't want this. We have to keep going. Let's keep going. And right at that moment, phone rings. Pick up the phone. It's an old client who says, "Hey, I've got the project. I need you. Like, how soon can you show up?" "Oh, we could be there Monday. No problem. We're there." That's how on the edge for 5 years that it was. But what happens is, as you put, and I think it takes about 5 years for any startup to become an actual viable business. And that's been my experience with other endeavors as well. And at that point, there's enough word of mouth and enough skills and enough understanding the industry and everything, that now you start to have more work than you can do. And then at that point, and a lot of my students, because I teach people how to build landscape companies, ecological permaculture landscape companies. And I find this is the crux position for a lot of folks. They can get started, they can get known, they get some establishment, and then there becomes a moment where either they have to go to the next level, or they're going to start losing clients, losing staff, and things are going to unravel. It's a weird little thing that happens around 4 or 5 years in, and you have to take a risk. Usually that risk is hiring people onto your business team who are not billable. That means that you can't bill their hours out to clients. People in the office, taking phone calls, returning phone calls, doing the bookkeeping, doing administrative stuff. These are vital components of a running system. It's an ecosystem, and this is part of the nourishment that keeps the exchange flowing and moving. But those are hard decisions to make, to hire people. And often when you get more work than you can handle, then you start thinking, well, what do I do? If I say yes to all these projects, then how do I come through and service the land and the people in a way that still is in integrity? And sometimes that means hire a bunch more people, try to get them trained. And so it takes a bit of time to go through those processes and a lot of risk. But for me, it was always that seed of, seeing a landscape come to life We've transformed asphalt parking lots. We've transformed schools. We've transformed cities. We've transformed, congested forests that were about to burn down. When you start to see these landscapes respond to management, and you see food growing in abundance, and people are like, I have too much food. Oh my gosh, like this is my big problem. That's the problem I want you to have. Then it's it's game on. This is what we're doing, and this works. And when on a Fridays we had a tradition for years and years and years. On Fridays, we'd all come back to the ranch where we kind of our office is, and have a beer or have a barbecue, and listen to each other's stories, talk about each other's kids, talk about each other's families. And at one point, this light bulb went off. Like, there's 50 people, not just who work for me, but all their families depending on this company right now. Right now, there's probably 75 to 100 people depending on this company right now. And these people are spending their days planting fruit trees and digging swales and putting in roof catchment systems and, all that. So,
yeah, that's so fantastic to hear. And I started getting really excited, starting to hear where you're taking it from, from the forest to the city to schools to all of these places across your bioregion, I suppose. And I wonder, I often look at the suburbs around. I live here in Australia on the Sunshine Coast, and it's one of the fastest growing suburban areas. I'm up in the hinterland, but all the bit between me and the coast is starting to spread out with cities, suburbs. And with all the work that I've done over the years and all the places that I've seen, the possibilities of designing them differently really excites me. But I always find this bit of an edge. I wonder whether you have any interesting examples of how new suburbs have been able to be transformed into, or whether you've had any influence into that space. I'm trying to find the key to that. I don't know. That's a bit of a random question, but if you've got any ideas of how to approach developers or.
Yes, I do. I have a project like that right now, currently, that we're working on. We are working with a developer who is about to put in, I always forget, maybe it's 250 units. It's a whole building a whole neighborhood. And they are very conscious already. So, that helps. But one of the things that and I have a few other folks I've talked with too, that are doing similar things. One of the things that they are starting to understand is that instead of building homes to just sell a home, they actually get more value if they're selling a lifestyle. And this is really the approach. Obviously, it's part of that money conversation. And we've seen it too, how places that we have transformed into permaculture paradise, gardens that look like your garden, that looks like my garden. Typically in this area, when that house sells, in almost every case, just in the last few years, it's been selling for bids and $100,000 over asking price for the garden. People are buying that lifestyle more than they're buying the house, because yes, the house is cool. Yeah. We need a house. But what's going to happen when the next pandemic hits? What's going to happen when the next fire hits? What's going to happen? People are on edge and they want security. And I think globally in Western industrialized culture, there's a new understanding that security isn't just financial. It's also peace of mind. It's food, it's medicine, it's access to nature. And so with this developer I'm working with right now, they're kind of on that. And so we're designing a 25-acre farm, regenerative farm in the middle of this neighborhood.
Fantastic.
Yes. And this farm will be there'll be a CSA program that will provide for the neighborhood. And the farm will be a place for people in the neighborhood to come, push your strollers, push your babies, go around the hiking trail that's going around the edge, come in. Then there'll be cultural events, harvesting events and music events. And, have your wedding here, have your daughter's wedding here, or whatever it may be, have your bar mitzvah here. That's how we're designing this space. So there's cultural relations in honoring of the community, as well as food production, as well as connection to the land. And what I'm starting to understand, working with this developer and kind of speaking more to this is about selling a lifestyle more than the house. Mm. And if you're a developer wanting to make money, that is going to be a lot more attractive to this kind of millennial generation or new people. The new way of thinking about the world is a different kind of security that you provide. So I think that is one way to look at it. In agrihoods, essentially it's an agrihhood. Mm-hmm. And there's so many great examples around the world of agrihoods.
Fantastic. Yeah, so the agrihhood idea is absolutely fantastic. And I've seen examples of this across Europe and in the States as well. And I keep spruiking it here in Australia, and I just have not been able to get an edge in yet. And I think it's so possible. When we have the land, we have so many new sort of suburban developments getting started now. Like, now is the perfect time for these to get going. So, I'm looking for, maybe I need to go on a bit of a road trip around Australia and talking to different developers with examples to boot, and just sharing this out. Mm.
And another in is talking with county officials and finding the ones that are also aligned with the permaculture thinking, because one of the things that's happened in Sonoma County and really building on that earlier conversation about the Great Garden Giveaway and what we did 20 plus years ago. From that, members of that group, that original group I worked with, they got elected to the city council at the age of 24, and went on to become mayor and be on the decision-making body for 8 years after that. And from that point on, those that our city council has been a progressive majority council for decades, built out of this sort of wellspring of good ecological thinking and planning in the city by a grassroots organization.
And as a 19-year-old doing what your heart speaks you to do, you would have had no idea that was going to be the ripple effect of your actions, is it? I mean, that's the thing, is when you ground yourself in being in service and, coming from this place of trying to be in service, to do good in the world, to regenerate the planet, there's this myceliation that happens, and it brings a kind of a power to the movement that you have no idea when those little new mushrooms are going to sort of start to pop up and be seen. But there's this rippling going on, this connective thread that's unseen most of the time. And we, I think that's really
exactly beautiful. So how many city planner folks or future city planner folks have taken your programs, listened to your podcast, or listening to us right now, and are the ones that will either are now or in the near future approving these suburban developments? And what kinds of parameters are they putting on these developments? Because one of the things that's been happening a little bit more in Sonoma County, where I live, is the planners. We have permaculture trained people on the board of supervisors. We have permaculture trained people on multiple city councils, permaculture trained people in the planning departments. And it takes time. And I'm positive that exists throughout Australia too. And that within that, then when developers are coming and saying, we want to do this and that project, you say, okay, great. We want you to do the project too, but we want you to have this much green space. We want you to grow these kinds of trees. We want you to look at all on-site water management, and these sorts of stipulations. And the developer's like, oh, shoot. Okay. I haven't done it that way before. Oh no, I need somebody who knows what to do to help me.
Erik.
Yes.
Yeah. So you've been teaching people how to set up these companies well, and you've written a book as well, a couple of books now, actually. So what's the latest one that's about to come out? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's called The Regenerative Landscaper. And honestly, this is 25 years of experience all wrapped up in this book. It's I would say it's probably will be one of the most comprehensive manuals out there on regenerative design, permaculture, and the rest. It's 520 pages, packed with fully referenced scientific backing of the cutting edge ecological sciences that we know and how to implement them. But what I wanted to do with this book, which I haven't seen a lot in the ecological design and farming space and this sort of thing, I haven't seen a lot of this, which is, get beyond inspiration. Of course, it's filled with inspiration, but not just about that. It's not just about theory and exciting ideas, but how do you go from that to then actually doing stuff? Doing the projects. And this is something that I find a lot of students of permaculture struggle with. As I'm sure you've seen, you come out of a permaculture course and you're so excited. And while a lot of folks who come out of these programs are turned on by the principles and such, they still don't really know how to apply a principled way of thinking to the work. And so usually ends up being more about technique than bigger strategy. And so you go to the land and you say, oh, swales, of course, every project should have swales. We'll swale the world, and I did the same exact thing. I'm totally guilty of that. Without stepping back and looking at, well, what's here already? What's actually the ecological dynamics that are occurring right now? And who are the stakeholders here, human and non-human? And how do we create an experience of collectively designing and stewarding and managing and moving towards a goal that takes into account all these project stakeholders, and I mean birds, lizards, foxes, trees. Those are all project stakeholders. And so this book is really about how to do it in a very rational way. How to create a project timeline, how to manage a budget, how to implement an agroforestry system from step by step. And so that's what I wanted to gift to the world. It's really a legacy book, is something that you can take and you can really dive in and reference it. And of course, the permaculture manual, that was like breakfast, lunch, and dinner in my early 20s, just munching up that manual, implementing every single thing that I could. But Bill is this brilliant thinker, and sometimes it's hard to wrap your mind around, like, what's he saying? I don't totally understand it, and I would read like a column and then spend a week trying to figure out.
Yeah, you have to go away. You can't read it cover to cover, that book.
No. So I probably would do it 3-4 times, and then my friends and I would be like, "What does your Permy book look like?" It's like, "Oh, I sheet mulch the cover of mine." You're like, "Oh, you're better than us." So, but there was some struggle in the realistic side of implementation, and I think that what my book offers is a smoother, more realistic way of doing the work, so that people who want to do this professionally, this book would be a manual for professionals, but that's just one of the audiences. For anybody who wants to just do it in their own backyard, build their garden, build their homestead, this would be a full-scale manual to do that.
Oh, fantastic. I know that it's taken you years to do this, and I it's kind of like a little bit of growing up at permaculture. Like you're saying, what Bill did was he grabbed a whole lot of things and put it together, and there's like, here's an idea, here's all the things that I've been thinking of. And through the practicing and the experimentation and the application in all these different contexts, it's kind of like it's grown up into what you're now presenting as something that is super tangible and tested and tried, and bringing in like all the latest things that, like you're talking about. There's a lot that's been going on in the world in the last 30, 40 years. And, it's time to really bring those into the fore. I know it's taken you a long time. So can you tell us a bit about your writing process? That part of what I do on this podcast is as I'm speaking to authors, ask you about, how do you do it? Like for me, actually, I've always, in the back of my mind, there's about 10 books all hanging around here, but honestly, I don't even find the time to even start writing the first chapter because I'm off, there's the charity over here and there's the teaching over there. And, I've got kids at home and how do you write? How do you write?
I love that question because it's a process as you are acknowledging here that can be quite challenging, and especially with all the businesses and everything. Okay, so the first thing that I tell people who are interested in writing is that you have to get away from having things done right at the beginning. You have to let go of any expectation that what I write today is going to be good at all. That expectation has to go out completely. The most important thing to do is to get words on the page, no matter what quality they are. You have to start with something. And so you have an idea, boom, write down some notes, just get it down. I have really honed the art of dictating into my phone.
Oh, nice.
And for me, this became a life hack because the last thing I want to do is sit at a desk 6 to 8 hours a day at a computer. That's not a life that I want to live. So what I would do is I was like, okay, I'm going to write a new section on my book. I'm going to go to the beach and I'm going to hike 4 hours on the beach, dictating into my phone.
Oh, brilliant.
And so the night before, I would create a bit of an outline. Let's say we're going to talk about water harvesting. Okay, infiltration. Oh, okay, rain gardens, swales, terraces, rain catchment. Okay, tanks, roofs. So I'll just create a little bit of an outline there. Then I would just go out and I would just have adventure. And I would just dictate into my phone, and I don't even look at it when I'm doing it. The technology is pretty good, so it's maybe about 90%. When you go back, there's some things that are I don't even know what I was saying there. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't matter though. I could do 4,000 words in a day that way, and that's a significant amount of words in a day. So I would do that, and I created the whole first draft that way of every chapter. My book has 55 chapters or more. It's a 9-part book, and it's about 200,000 words of a book. And so I would do it that way. Then I would go back and I would edit that, and that's the sitting at the desk part. Now I'm editing it, but when I'm editing it, a new little thing clicks in. And when you're editing, one thing that people misinterpret about editing is it's mostly removing stuff. Mm-hmm. And that actually makes the writing so much better. So when you go in to remove, you're just like, that paragraph, delete, that feels so good actually to put that down and compress. So that's how I would do it. So I would reward myself. So I would oscillate between these writing adventures to get and I'm out in nature. I mean, if I want to talk about water, I'll go walk along a river. And then when my brain gets tired, I just stop, sit by the river, watch the egret, listen to the water, look at the willows, and the next idea comes. Let's keep walking.
Oh, that is so brilliant, Eric. And a book written in that way must have such a different tenor, I think. It really is emerging from that. And I think you might have just unlocked something in me telling me that story, because as an educator, a lot of the way that we communicate the knowledge is through speaking it out. And that articulation of ideas as you're teaching, and as all the ideas sort of flood into your brain, and you just bring all these things, and it comes out. I don't even know what I say at the end of lots of sessions, because it kind of comes. And that is kind of, if you're walking through a beautiful place and you imagine you have a group of people with you, maybe even, and you're explaining what's going on, maybe that's just boom.
Exactly.
Ah, thank you.
My pleasure. Yes. And I was the same exact way as you. I've always been good at teaching and public speaking and educating that way. And I thought, well, how could I bring my voice into the writing? Because, sitting here doing this is I'm not very good at. But I will say, just to forewarn you, that the writer's voice does have to change. It does have to become a writer's voice, not a speaker's voice, which you'll find. But that gets smoothed out in the editorial process. And all your little nuggets and gems and how you connect them are all there for you to find. And then you just have to adjust the words and how they, so when we speak, sometimes we add things at the end of a sentence that when you write it, you wouldn't put it at the end, you'd put it at the beginning, things like that.
Oh, interesting.
So those are some of the editorial things that would come up. It's like, oh, I have to rearrange this for a reader versus the way that a listener would hear it.
Yeah, great. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is story. How much story do you use to explain? It's like there's the abouting about how things happen, but there's also stories which open up people's perception of how those bits of information land. Where does that fit into your writing?
Well, story must be part of any book for anyone to want to sit and read through it. And you have to ground information, especially scientific information, in actual stuff, real things that happen. It can't just be la 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 all up here and then you don't have a story about actually how it was implemented or what you experienced. I think stories are a journey that a reader gets to go on, where they get to see a lot of your mistakes. I think that's one of the most important parts of stories, is to highlight mistakes and learning lessons. My approach is that I want readers to know that I'm human and that they are just as capable as I am at doing anything that I talk about or speak about. And I truly believe that 100%. I was a 19-year-old kid. It's like I had absolutely no skills. I could barely graduate high school. You know what I mean? But the path, step on the path and open up and listen and, eat, drink and breathe ecology and breathe this work into the world. And you go and you learn as you go. And I think how we become learners is probably one of the most important things that we could get from a permaculture course, honestly, is how do you become a learner?
Yeah.
How do you listen? How do you observe?
Yeah.
What kind of perception do you bring to the land or to a community or to a partner or a client? These are skills that are the most important. And if we can get that, then we can, all the rest will, the secrets of the universe will be shown to us. And so this book, those stories are parts of that experience of going out into the world with ideas and perception and either failing or having success. But one of the other aspects of my book is I do feature 10 other regenerative designers from around the world, a lot of women, people of color, indigenous folks, and tell their story. And so I felt like it was vitally important to not have this book be my voice, only my voice, because I'm a white dude in California with very specific context. And there's a lot of other contexts that when we talk about regenerative design and regenerative landscaping that are necessary to understand different approaches and ways of beings and cultural emergence that's happening from different cultural groups. And so it's so fun to tell the story of other people and the work that they've done, because it's so inspiring. And the possibilities, the things that people are doing, and this is a little bit of an aside, but it just has to be said. The amount of solution-oriented projects happening in the world right now, it's impossible to quantify this. Yeah. And when we get into these dark conversations about the world ending and out of control climate change and military industrial complex, all these things where you could just give your soul to that and die in your heart, what isn't able to be told because it's so decentralized and on such a massive scale is how many ecologically based regenerative systems are happening around the world. Millions and millions of them are happening right now today. We're not quantifying the carbon that they're capturing. We're not quantifying the food that they're producing. We're not quantifying the community resiliency that's being developed because it's totally decentralized. And I just think that I just wanted to state that, because I don't think it's a fair representation that we have in any media forms that tell us about the state of the world, because it's hard to quantify the good stuff.
I'm so glad that you said that, because when you do put on this lens and you see that dimension of the world and of what people are doing, when you notice those things, it fills your heart and your soul with this active hope of possibilities. And you know that everywhere around the world are these sort of seeds being planted, these ripples that are forming, and there is this mycelial network that connects them all. And what I love about permaculture, for example, is that it becomes a language that can connect us. When we speak across the planet, like I through the Institute, I speak with people on 6 continents almost daily, and just hearing these snippets of news and stories, and then they'll hear that and it'll see something over here, and it just keeps, and there is no measurement of it. I wouldn't even have a clue of how you begin to measure that. But this is, I think, the power of story. When we share the stories and we find a way for those stories to get out, and when there's a manifestation of those stories, and maybe a glimpse of it in the city, through the projects that you've always been doing, or something that's going on in the refugee settlement, like actually foregrounding those stories and finding a way. And this is why I also run a new program I started recently called Share Permaculture. It's like, how do we share what we're doing out to the world? And like, how do you blog it, YouTube it, podcast it, get into the media, get on TV, get on radio? Like, what are the skills that we need to tell those stories? Books are always the key part. That's the bit that eludes me, and I'm so like, congratulations for getting your second book. Is that right? This is
actually, if I'm counting all my books, this would be my 7th book.
No way, really? What are the others? Oh gosh, I'm totally out of the loop.
The others are some children's books,
Oh, really?
and some ecology-based coloring books, and kind of how I described my path into permaculture. When I don't go to college, I just kind of go out there and do and learn and find that way. Well, that was the same way for writing for me. So I spent the last, it's been 7 years now since I wrote the first book. And that was part of essentially putting myself through a master's writing program, not through any conventional means, but just through podcasts and online programs and experimentation and reading every single book on writing out there. So and then experiment, write. So I was producing little children's books and coloring books and things like that as a way to understand the industry, to learn about the production process, and to start to hone the writing skills. And so this new book that's coming out, The Regenerative Landscaper, this book for me is more like a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Those other books were more like training grounds. So there's still value in those. And especially I have a children's book called The Forest of Fire. And that's a book to help children understand wildfire and living through wildfire and fire ecology. And that one has been very well received, as we live in the lands of fire, as do you. Yes. And so how it affects children. And, we've been evacuated and have, been in the smoke and all of it, the whole experience. That's been a really nice book to share with folks, kids in schools and things like that. But it was all part of the learning process, to develop skills and understand the industry. And this new book, The Regenerative Landscaper, is the evolution and emergence of all of that.
And so, when will it be coming out? When can people get their hands on this book?
So it's will be available. It's available for pre-order right now through Synergetic Press and other outlets, and it will be officially sent out and available on August 22nd.
Mm.
That's when the printed versions will be released and the Kindle ebook versions will be released.
Fantastic! I can't wait to see it and to share it and to share this podcast and encourage absolutely everyone to get their hands on it. I think it's going to be a new textbook for permaculture educators. I think, in a way, this is a transformation of possibility right here. So thank you so much for taking the time. I know it's taken you how many years to write? I mean, apart from all of that that's gone, but actually in the process of this book, how many years has it taken you?
3 years of writing to get the book to this part, and diligent writing, every week for about 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's a big body of work, and thank you so much for sharing it and talking about it and your enthusiasm. And it is a full curriculum. It's a full curriculum, and I'm very excited to share with folks and see how people respond. And the hope is that it's a real reference book that people can come back to. One could read it from cover to cover. I did write it in such a way that there's a logical flow of information and with stories and inspiration and things like that can carry you all the way through. But people who are more experienced, who are well seasoned, could also just jump in and reference, the water sections. I think there's 7 or 8 chapters on water, things like that. That's a very robust part of the book.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to rigorously document your work and to make it available to the world. I mean, what a gift. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining me today and sharing your story. Absolutely inspiring. I'm going to go get my phone and go out and start walking, I think.
Yes. Oh, it's truly been a pleasure. I'm so grateful to you for having me and for all the work you do in the world. And thanks again.
Thanks, Erik. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Sense Making in a Changing World with the wonderful Erik Ohlsen. Check out the show notes below to get the link to his book and other resources, and I highly recommend that you get your hands on this book. Also, check out the notes too, where you can find out details about the permaculture courses that I run, and also where you can find links to my YouTube channel, my blog, and also all the free permaculture masterclasses and film clubs that I host too. And make sure you signed up to get the news and events. So come and join us here at the Permaculture Education Institute to learn the practical skills for designing and teaching permaculture and making a good livelihood while living a permaculture-inspired one planet way of life. Until next time, take care. See you all soon.